today anyway. The December 10th Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee. If we could get a roll call, please.
Mr. Appel. Dr. Armstrong. Mr. Birkin. Mr. Castile. Ms. Champagne. Dr. Clark. Mr. Harris. Mr. Hollis. Not present. Ms. Holloway. Ms. Mellering. Mr. Morris. Mr. Grabert. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Shall we move on?
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 3.1 and 4.1 through 4.4.
We have a motion. Mr. Birkin moves, and Mr. Harris seconds. Do we have any discussion? Do we have any comments? If not, the motion stands approved. Next.
Your first item is on page 122, item 3.2, consideration of the timeline and process for the establishment of the English Language Arts and Mathematics Content Standards Review Committee. The recommendation is to approve.
Mr. Birkin moves, Mr. Harris seconds. Do we have someone to present this?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Appel. Look, I'm really excited about this opportunity. We've been sharing this information with you as a board for a couple of months now, just about this upcoming opportunity around the opportunity to go into our math and reading English language arts standards, revisit those, and use expertise from across the state in the field to put these standards in a better place that more accurately reflects the content that we believe to be most important for students. And the more that I've worked with this, with our teaching and learning team, frankly, as wonky as it is, the more excited I get about this opportunity around English and math standards, particularly when, even as this board came in at the beginning of the year, we talked a great deal about just foundational educational content and the pursuit of academic excellence in elementary schools. And so I'm just really excited about this opportunity. We have gone through a similar process like this before, whether it was the social studies standards or most recently the computer science standards. And so we're excited about taking on English language arts and math. And at this point, Dr. Chasson, our deputy superintendent, will make a presentation.
And if you would, could you focus on the timeline and schedule? I think that's important for everyone to understand. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good morning. Jenna Chasson, Department of Education. Bringing you all. Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Bringing you all just some information about the review process for our Content Standards Review for English Language Arts and Mathematics. And just an overview, the Louisiana Student Standards for ELA and Math were last reviewed in 2015-2016, and policy does ask that Louisiana content standards be reviewed and revised periodically every 7 years. And so it is time for us to take a look at our ELA and math standards and take an opportunity to review and revise and make them stronger and better. We propose a standards review process led by professional Louisiana educators that results in the best Louisiana standards for students. Revision goals for each content area will focus the review committee around strengthening foundational skills as well as providing a more clear and relevant progression in high school. We have some stated goals here for both ELA and math. In ELA, we will work with the committee to strengthen the foundational skills standards progression throughout grades kindergarten through 5 to the science of reading. We also look forward to reinforcing a specific measurable language standards progression, including grammar, mechanics, and usage in all grades level, but with a special focus in grades 9 through 12. And this is from feedback from stakeholders, really asking and thinking about the English portion of the ACT assessment and thinking about the heavy emphasis on language and grammar. We also look in ELA to provide world, American, and Louisiana exemplars of reading text complexity, quality, and range for each grade band. And in math, we look forward to strengthening the foundational skills standards progression to ensure the development of advanced skills, including logic and reasoning, and identify pathways of relevant mathematics for students in grade 9 through 12 that more explicitly is aimed at success in college, career, or service. You see here the structure of the review committees. There is a 15-member steering committee to guide the process and assure that updates align with the revision goals from the previous slide. The steering committee will vote to send the committee's draft standards to the department so we can ultimately make a final recommendation on the standards to you all. The content area work groups, which will be composed of teachers and members with specific content expertise, will review, update, and assure that there is vertical alignment for the standards on which the steering committee will discuss and vote. We at the department will facilitate the process by presenting Bessie's goals to the steering committee and work groups, by providing some resources to frame the process, and by providing technical support throughout the entire process. This is the makeup of the 15-member steering committee, and it is composed of members from each of the 2 proposed content work groups. The steering committee will work to guide the process, assure that the content updates from the work groups align to Bessie's review goals, and receive and review the public comments. Two content work groups will be established to maximize the efficiency of the writing process and to center discussions in each content area. These work groups will make content standards that align both vertically and horizontally. As each content area progresses in their work, their steering committee representatives in the content groups will present the outcomes to the entire steering committee. Through strategic collaboration, the work groups will progress systematically through the process. Following today, we do plan to open the application for both the work groups and the steering committee. We will work with our partners in higher education, Louisiana educator organizations, and school systems to encourage all interested parties to apply. We'll utilize all of our communication mechanisms like our newsletter, webinars, and social media. The application will be open for a 1-month period and will allow applicants to reach out to the English Language Arts, Literacy, and Mathematics teams here at the department with any questions. Candidates will be reviewed upon the application window closure, and application scoring will occur through an objective process. We plan to bring our recommendations for the committees to you all for approval at your March Bessie meeting. And this is the timeline. The K-12 Louisiana Student Standards for ELA and Math Review timeline is designed to allow the committee 4 months to work on reviewing the standards and for 2 months of public comment. Monthly progress reports will be provided to you all from the committees. Our instructional materials review process, or IMR process, will re-review all of the posted high-quality materials currently on our website immediately following this process. Optimally, Louisiana students and teachers could begin implementation of the revised standards during the 2025-2026 school year. We have a wonderful opportunity upon us to revise and make our Louisiana English Language Arts and Mathematics standards better and the best that they've ever been. This is all in alignment. You know, we talk a lot and think a lot about this pursuit of academic excellence, and that really begins with our content standards. That really, the hope and the goal is that we are able to clearly articulate what we want students in Louisiana to know and be able to do by the end of each grade level. And so we really hope to do this And I think this goes along really well with our increased focus on literacy and mathematics in our state. And we plan on really using this opportunity not only to make our standards better, but also to revitalize and reinvigorate our interest, our professional learning, and ultimately instruction in our ELA and math classrooms across the state. That concludes my update.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I think, speaking for myself anyway, we would hope that our standards meet or exceed those in other states and perhaps in other countries. Is part of this process to look at what's going on around the United States and maybe the world to see that we are competitive with those states?
Absolutely. So our literacy, ELA, and math teams here at the department have scanned the standards of other countries and other states throughout our country, and those are the resources, some of the resources that we'll be providing to the work group and steering committee members.
Okay, good. 'Cause I think that's really important. We don't want to fall behind, without realizing we're falling behind. The other thing you mentioned was alignment with national testing, and you highlighted ACT. Does ACT give comments or input as to whether the standards meet or exceed the requirements of the test taker? Does that make sense? In other words, how do we be sure that the standards we're providing equal or exceed those that are established in the test questions on an ACT or other national tests?
Yeah, I think that's something that our team, through its technical assistance, really keeps top of mind throughout. And I'll say I mentioned ACT in particular because that's just been feedback that we've received over the last several years, is that, a large portion of the ACT is that ACT English section that is very heavy on grammar, usage, mechanics, and it is something that we've been asked. I think there is a desire across the state to make more prevalent, especially in our high school standards. And so that's why that's really one piece that's at the forefront, because that
Right.
keeps really coming up in conversation.
Well, I think it's really important because for those that keep up with the literature, ACT is coming back in vogue. It had fallen away for a while, but it seems the universities are getting back to the realization that it really does work. And we don't want our students ill-prepared to take the ACT so they can't apply to universities wherever they choose. Last thing, and this is just a personal comment, you mentioned in the math section about logic. I've mentioned it before, but if you want to be proficient in computer science, in coding, you have to be proficient in traditional logic. So I know you mentioned that. I just want to reemphasize the importance of that. People don't realize the significance, but when you're writing lines of code, it's all logic. So that's just a personal comment. Does anybody else have anything?
I do.
Mr. Morris?
Thank you. Are we good? There we go. Yeah, I shared Senator Pell's concern about ACT alignment, so I hope that we have a focus on that when we're looking at the standards. And then when we look at the standards, I'm also interested, based on feedback I get from students about, what can we do at the board to help to make education relevant for our students. So I'm really interested in how within the standards we can integrate practical applications so that students can appreciate the relevance of the mathematics, for example, that we expect them to master in school. So I hope that that's going to be a focus. Another similar question would be potential for integrating some reference to career pathways, both in ELA and mathematics. So if I learn XYZ theorem in mathematics, okay, I can see the practical application, with geometry and welding, that sort of relationship. So I'd like to see that considered focus in the standards. And then the last one I had is AI, the whole AI conversation. So I haven't seen nationally any other states that, at least as yet, that have developed specific state standards for AI. I think the approach that I've seen is that they'll be integrated into the other core standards. So I'm really interested in consideration for how we can consider AI applications where they're relevant to the core standards as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo.
A great presentation, Dr. Chasson, and looking forward to us developing new standards. In developing them, I'm thinking about how the process rolls out in terms of we develop standards and that leads to curriculum development by the various districts. And we develop standards with the expectation that we will achieve better academic results for our students. What are we doing in terms of measuring our progress monitoring? We create a standard and we expect that it will achieve this particular result that will improve the quality of education for kids. Can you walk me through how we do that? We've got a standard. We expect that this will be achieved. You know, Mr. Appel referenced the ACT, for example. We've got LEAP. Will there be some way of tracking the correlation between the standards that we create and the expected outcome on, I guess, certain tests, LEAP, ACT, and otherwise?
I believe our state assessments are where we measure standards. We do know that our assessments will update in alignment with the new standards. That happens in the aftermath. I think progress monitoring for our earliest grade levels, we have our literacy screener that does the beginning of the year, middle of year, and end of year alongside our standards and our expectations. Right now for literacy and in the future for numeracy, like we've talked about previously based on last year's legislation. I do think a lot of the progress monitoring that you're speaking of occurs throughout daily instruction and is oftentimes embedded in those curriculum-based assessments that teachers give and monitor throughout the year and then ultimately tested at the state level at the end of the year. And so it's of highest importance that the materials, the curricular resources that our educators use in classrooms align with Louisiana standards and then ultimately that the LEAP assessment does as well.
Yeah. Great. I think that's wonderful. Let me ask a slightly different question then. In terms of we set a standard, but then there's an expectation that this will yield a different result, a better result. And I'm sure the committee, and I know the department is going to be doing this, but I want to make sure I understand it a little bit better. And that is, what will we be doing as a committee as we set these up and say, if we do X, we expect to? On the back end, the progress monitoring, that's exactly what should happen. But I'm just trying to figure out and understand a little bit better that when we change a standard, how is it that we will be predicting what we expect the different outcome will be?
Mr. Castillo, before Dr. Chasson answers that, I just have a thought about that I'd like to share. So as Dr. Chasson mentioned, every X amount of years, 7, et cetera, we go through this process again in different content areas. And so over that period of time, what happens, and I can say specifically for this because this is what we're discussing, when we're having conversations with teachers, when we're doing trainings, when we're involved in all the processes relative to education in the state, we will often hear from educators, oh, the standards seem to be not addressing this issue or that issue. So in particular, if I take the ELA standards right now, what we know to be true is that over the last 4 to 5 years, we have done really accelerated work around the science of reading and phonics-based instruction, et cetera, and we're not confident that the standards as they are today fully incorporate that concept. And so we want to make sure that that is really tight and aligned. And then another just really clear example is in terms of ACT, the need for students to understand usage, mechanics, grammar, et cetera. When we visit with middle and high school teachers or when we visit with middle and high school students, we know that while grammar is taught, we're not sure that it receives the emphasis maybe that it deserves so that students can be successful on an ACT. And so these are some of the conversations that I know I've personally had with teachers across the state. So that's like anecdotal and qualitative, but it is in many ways the way in which we approach the thoughts about what a revision should look like based on what is versus what is not working to get a stronger result on whatever assessment or outcome we're looking to see.
That's very helpful. And I'm wondering, going back to, again, to Ms. Appel's comments about competing nationally and internationally, perhaps, is there a quantitative way of saying, here's what our standards provide for, and I presume this, again, will be a part of the committee process, and if we do A, B, and C, that are best practices in other states, that will achieve these additional results. So all of what you said, but perhaps other quantitative measures or considerations will be taken into consideration as a part of the committee process. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think it's about the clarity of the articulation of the standard. And it's not that grammar doesn't exist in the current standards, or to Dr. Brumley's point, any parts of the science of reading like phonics doesn't exist in the current standards. They do, those things do exist in the current standards. It's about, how much more clearly can we articulate those in a vertical progression of skills from one year to the next. And I think about the work we were able to do in our social studies standards, our freedom framework, and we were able to get very precise in the clarity of those standards, and I think make it quite easy for social studies teachers in our state to gain a great understanding of what's expected at each grade level. And that's really the hope now with ELA and math, is we're able to model with the specificity and the clarity that's brought out in those social studies standards. We now want to do that in ELA and math and really bring to the forefront those concepts like the science of reading, like the emphasis on grammar, the foundational skills in mathematics.
Great, thank you. Thank you both, very helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, just one last clarification. Just for the record, this process does not involve the review of testing or assessments. This is strictly standards. I just want to make sure everybody understands that, because there's a distinction. Dr. Brumley, I think you had another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge, because we have a number of educators in the room, educational leaders. I know a school board association is here, the superintendent's association. So yesterday we released a national study that was conducted looking at NAEP scores across the entire country. And I think I frankly think it's a really big deal because, Mr. Appel, you talked a lot about being able to accurately check Louisiana status versus other states and across, and Mr. Morris, you speak to this a good bit too, across the globe. And so this particular study that we released yesterday I found really interesting, because what it looked at, it looked at our NAEP scores, which are scores that students from across the entire country, a test that students from across the entire country take. And it took every state essentially, and just in layman's terms, it basically equalized the states in terms of demographic. So like income level, students with exceptionalities, English language learners, ethnicity, and in many ways just equalized that out, normed that across the entire country, and then applied each state's NAEP scores under that formula. And what it found was that Louisiana was essentially #1 in growth in NAEP whenever you equalize for demographics. And then in terms of absolute performance, it found that Louisiana was #4 in the country on NAEP once you equalize for demographic factors. And so I think that's a real testament to the work of educators. So I just want to thank you all in the room. But at the same time, like we're in this pursuit for greater outcomes and academic excellence. And so that's why many of the initiatives are important, taking a look at these standards and making sure they're refined. This isn't about, a complete blow up of the standards as they exist today. This is about a revision to be more targeted, to be more precise. Efforts like the tutoring efforts, that we're embarking on. And so I think all of that matters to continue to raise the bar. But I really do think it's worth noting that this national study came out yesterday that equalizes across demographics and where it placed the state of Louisiana in terms of outcomes. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity with the educators present just to thank them and mention that particular research that came out.
Thank you, sir, and that is certainly something to be celebrated. However, I think as a board, we would like to have the same results without the equalization, if you understand what I'm talking about.
And I don't think I've ever been anything but clear on the fact that we're pleased, but we're not satisfied.
I understand that. Mr. Morris, you had to?
No, I read Superintendent Brumley's quote yesterday, and I was going to share that, but the way I read the quote was that we're very proud of where we
Yeah.
are, but we're not
Should be.
satisfied. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
acknowledge the educators in the room as well, the progress that we've made as a state, and certainly optimistic about the outlook going forward.
Thank you. Does anyone in the audience wish to address the motion on the floor? No one? Okay. Do we have any objection to the motion? Hearing no objection, the motion stands adopted. At this time, would deviate just for a moment. Ms. Holloway, you have something on a personal nature?
Sure, thank you. A point of personal privilege. We have a couple of guests here, and actually 3, that I'd like to recognize, and quite excited to have a certain individual here. But thank you, Ms. Rebecca Bernoil, who has been appointed to the LSU Board of Supervisors by the governor. But today she has a couple of guests, one in particular that I'm quite excited with since I've been working on Bessie. I've had the privilege to work with deans from different universities, and today we have Dr. Eugene Kennedy, the interim director, who's here, and I am very excited to have you here with us. And there's a lot of great work happening across the state at universities, and I'm privileged to work with the deans on that. So thank you for being here. And then there is Miss Melissa McCormick Landry is here. She's president of ACE Scholarships in Louisiana, and thank you for that, because I know how important scholarships are, as I am also one that has developed one. So thank you for servicing our children. So welcome. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us this morning, and we look forward to future relationships. Okay, next item.
Your next item is on page 128, item 3.3, consideration of an update report regarding attendance and key performance indicators. The recommendation is to receive. Updated backup has been distributed.
Ms. Holloway moves, and Mr. Morris seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Appel. I appreciate that. So Dr. Singleton is going to give this updated report and provide information to the board. I want to personally acknowledge in advance Dr. Clark for her leadership in this particular area. You should stay here, unless you want to personally give the presentation. I want to acknowledge Dr. Clark for her leadership on the STAR Task Force and really being the point person on the board for this very important matter. So Dr. Singleton, if you'd provide the update.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So this update is about attendance in our educational priorities that we will be focusing on for the next 4 years related to attendance. So we're going to start the presentation by looking at past data regarding the average number of days absent across our state. As you can see, we hovered between 9 to 12 days absent from 2020-21 to last school year. We'll talk more about how we're going to help to improve that across our state as the presentation goes on. Next up is the data slide about chronic absenteeism over the past few years. As you can see, we were at 28% in 2020-21, and it has dropped and has increased steadily throughout 2023. This is the second KPI that we will focus on as an agency. The final data slide I want to start out with is our statewide truancy trend. Since 2021, it has hovered at a range of 40%. As a reminder, truancy is defined as when a student has 5 unexcused absences or 5 tardies in a semester. So what have we done to date regarding attendance as we move forward to address these concerns? For a period, the agency did not have anyone doing attendance work, but a need was realized and a CWA liaison was hired. Since that, a number of items have occurred. Initially, we had to study and understand the need. We engaged with national organizations such as Attendance Works and the National Student Engagement and Attendance Center. We worked with the Student Research and Evaluation Center at LSU to determine best practices, gaps, and needs. The Louisiana Attendance Alliance was formed to assist with locating nearly 1,200 students who had not returned to school after 2020. School systems implemented dropout programming to track trends and data and established ninth grade academies to provide targeted learning experiences for students in grades 9, those most at risk of dropping out. As a result of this study and the information and working with those external organizations, guidance was developed. Monthly calls instituted, and the annual CWA Summit started. The CWA Reference Guide was updated for the first time since 2014. Attendance awards were established. The agency, along with school systems, began to observe Attendance Awareness Month annually in September. Various CWA personnel participated in e-learning provided by Attendance Works. Over this time, systems and schools had the opportunity to utilize guidance, but it was found to be cumbersome. There was a lack of knowledge of how to implement the guidance with fidelity. In 23-24, a pilot occurred at Baker High School on how to implement the guidance so that we could learn best practices. As a result of that pilot, staff has created a training module to better help schools implement the attendance guidance. More information to come. Finally, the STAR Task Force was implemented to address recommendations surrounding attendance. Some more information about the work in City of Baker school system. The Social Research and Engagement Center at LSU conducted a pilot to do two things: build a capacity to provide evidence-based tiered attendance interventions systematically and with fidelity, and to build capacity in families to assist in building community and positive attendance culture. This was done by conducting a needs assessment focused on top reasons students miss school and the needs of students. They found that some of the top reasons students miss school was due to a lack of basic needs, perceived lack of value in attending school, discipline issues, academic and learning challenges. They developed a school-specific MTSS, multi-tiered system of support framework based on the needs of the individual school. Tier 1 interventions included universal preventive strategies, and they created Tier 2 school success plans for early childhood, lower grades, and upper grades. These plans help to identify barriers and root causes for school avoidance and disengagement that contributes to chronic absenteeism. Those are just a few of the target resources developed for City of Baker schools. Using data from the needs assessment, the pilot also highlighted the need to develop community partnerships and relationships. This allowed for external engagement and support prior to and after school. A strategic plan was developed and created to increase family participation and to amplify the voice of the family. Additionally, parent-friendly resources were created. As a result of the work in Baker High School, there were some changes. The truancy rate from 22-23 to 23-24 reduced from 81% to 75%. The chronic absenteeism rate reduced from 48% to 36%. So gains were seen at the school level. So we have found that by focusing on work at the school, changes can be made with regards to attendance. And we'll come back to this particular work in just a moment. Next, I want to move to the STAR Task Force and there's recommendations of the STAR Task Force. The report is in your packet, and over the next few slides, we'll provide an overview of the task force, which was chaired by Dr. Clark. The task force was initially convened in 2022, and ultimately it brought recommendations to Bessie in January 2023. LDOE continued to support attendance initiatives as stated previously during that time period. The task force was reconvened in April of this year. During 2024, the task force discussed a variety of topics, including utilization of data to inform practice, the usage of attendance teams, implementing multi-tiered systems of support, standardizing notes from parents, how data systems can be used to inform attendance at the school level, the importance of career exploration at the elementary and middle school level, and Project Truancy in EBR Parish. As a result of all of the discussions, there were 8 recommendations that you have in your packet. So the recommendations include requiring schools to utilize an existing team to monitor and analyze attendance data, keeping the definition in truancy in statute, but creating a discretionary referral process to efficiently utilize the resources of the justice system, adopting a formal definition of chronic absenteeism as students who are enrolled for at least 10 days and are absent for 10% or more of days enrolled. Students are counted at once at each level, and this falls in lines with federal guidelines. Identify ways to make past attendance history available to receiving school systems when students move from one school to the next. Create model program guidance on reducing truancy in conjunction with juvenile court justice and our law enforcement partners. Limit the number of days a student can be excused from a parent note to 5 days per year. Create a standardized paper and/or digital form for parent notes that is optional for school systems and parents to utilize. And then to require and improve delivery of career exploration and extracurricular activities in elementary and middle school. So how will we measure the success of the work that we're doing here in the agency? As a result of working with the Student Research and Evaluation Center, attendance work, looking at the research, consulting with national partners, and the work in Baker, we've set a goal for 2028 that we will reduce the average number of days absent for all students by 2 days per student, and to reduce the percent of chronically absent students by 5 percentage points. How will we do that work? Through the efforts of our attendance and student support team, we will raise awareness of attendance-related concerns by assisting school systems in the utilization of data to identify attendance trends and to ensure students are attending school. The team is in the process of developing and finalizing a professional development to assist school-based attendance teams on utilizing data, determining the needs of the school, and implementing multi-tiered systems of support to address attendance issues. Additionally, the team will provide on-site support as needed to attendance teams and data managers that attendance reporting is accurate. As stated, our team is working on this professional development series. The PD focuses on attendance teams as they are the individuals closest to the students. The PD will assist the team in identifying barriers specific to the school related to attendance. For example, is there a lack of basic needs as was identified in Baker? Is there a systemic issue in the community where attendance school is not valued? How can the school work to combat this barrier? What multi-tiered systems of support interventions need to be implemented? Are there community organizations that can provide assistance? This plan will assist the school with identifying specific interventions needed needed for school A that may vary from school H. So back to our data slides. So I stated that our goal is to reduce chronic absenteeism by 5 percentage points by 2028. So reduce it from 24% to 18%. And then with the average numbers of days missed, to reduce that by 2 by 2028, taking it down to the average number of days missed is 9. As we are just getting this work off the ground, we have one indicator to report on: participation in our CWA monthly call. That has been one of the constants that has been implemented since 2021. Over the course of this year, our goal is to increase participation from 2023-24 by 10%. As we move forward with this effort over the next 12 months, we will report on additional metrics next December. Finally, I want to talk about the school systems that we're going to invite to work with us on this effort. The next 2 slides display those school systems who have the highest number of days absent. They're in our lowest quartile. Actually, our lowest, what do we call it, 60th quartile of a quartile. We determined there were 328 schools with students missing more than 13 days, on average, 13 days a year. Out of those 328, we identified the lowest 25% of those 328, which narrowed that down to 82 schools. On average, those students miss between 17 to 53 days a year. So these are those school systems, not the schools identified here, and then the traditional school systems, and these are charters with the lowest in attendance. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. I think we collectively as a board consider this to be a huge problem. I would like to call and ask if Mr. Ortling, as superintendent, if you could come down and give us your thoughts. I know you're not prepared, and I apologize, but I'd like to hear whether you believe that this is as significant as we do and what you think we should be doing different, or how the superintendents can react and help us. Just general comments, please.
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Ken Ortling, Superintendent St. Charles Parish Public Schools, also a president of the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents. First of all, absolutely, I think we fully support this initiative as well as a lot of the recommendations. I can tell you from personal experience in St. Charles Parish, we've taken a very proactive approach relative to work with our judicial system as well as the district attorney's office and local nonprofit organizations to provide the wraparound support to the families as much as it is to the students. So in seeing some of the recommendations, which seem to me those are very much aligned to those types of initiatives. Obviously, if kids aren't in school, they're not learning. So it is as much of a concern for us as it is for you all as a board. So some of the recommendations that I just saw certainly are aligned to, I think, many of the positive proactive approaches to resolving this issue. And if it's not monitored, obviously, then it's probably not going to be followed up on. The biggest concern that you hear often from educators is we can only do so much with the kids that are in our schools, and it ends up being a community or, sometimes a family concern. So how do we get the community involved at a point to where you can actually make a difference? Because as you said, the attendance groups, very similar. We have a very similar structure in our school system that we find is effective. But when it comes down to the chronically absent students and families, unless you get the judicial system involved with teeth behind it, you're not going to see a difference. And I can tell you, we started a collaborative last year, and it's going into this year. In fact, I have a meeting next Monday with all three of our judges, the district attorney's office, the sheriff's office, and nonprofits. And they immediately, within the first 3 weeks of school, met with approximately 70 families of students that were already considered to be chronically absent after the first 9 weeks. It was that change in initiative that really drove a significant change in those families and those kids attending school. It wasn't necessarily what we did, but what we did together as a group, as a collaborative, but it has to involve those community partners in a working relationship with judicial systems so that there is some teeth, because basically if those families didn't show up to the court, this was a diversionary program for the parents or guardians, that if they didn't show up, then certain other measures were going to be taken. We found that having that, that's one part of it. Obviously, the engagement in school is another part, having activities that engage students and engage in the school so that they want to return. But you have to have something that's going to have some weight with our families as well.
Well, it's a shame that you have to turn to the judicial system, but that's the world we live in. But my question is, do you know if other districts are doing the similar type of activities with their judicial systems, or have you been able to poll them to see what they're doing?
We haven't recently. That's certainly something we could do. I do know that there was a recent collaborative, probably about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, in partnership with the department, that they had a pretty big focus specifically on attendance. And I know some systems, I recall Rapides, Sharing, Baker, I know you mentioned, but there were several school systems that we all feel absenteeism and chronic absenteeism is a problem. I can't speak on behalf because that hasn't been something we have polled our membership, but we could certainly do so moving forward from that standpoint.
I think it would be useful if you're finding good success. It would be good to know if other districts are doing similar things, and it'd be useful for these guys to know something that works. Even though, as I say, it's a shame. We shouldn't be living in a world where you have to do that, but we do. So, you want to, Dr. Clark?
And to add on to what was just stated, I think sitting on the panel, what the committee, what I found was that the data collection that we have, it's not formalized across the state of Louisiana. And so even when I look at the schools that's listed and the districts that's listed, one of them is my districts, the districts that's listed. But our collection and our reporting started at 15 days. And so once we looked at the differences in how the data is being collected, some schools allow 5 to 10 parent notes. We allow 0 parent notes. And so I think we have to first go back to make sure before we exploit data on what's happening in our state and at the districts, making sure that we have guidelines and some type of formalized standard of what is truancy. And truancy and chronic absenteeism are two different things. Chronic absenteeism, we talk about that a lot, but that could be suspensions. That could be why a kid is not coming to school. They're ill. Any type of absence is considered a chronic absence, chronic absenteeism. So I think we need to make sure that we don't combine truancy necessarily with chronic absenteeism, because those are two different things. But truancy is across the nation. It has doubled across the nation from 2018 to 2023, and the fact that kids aren't coming to school. So before we make it punitive, I think we need to make sure that the data that's being collected is consistent from one district to the next. Part of it is making sure that when we excuse it, it's excused across the state the same way. So when we collect the data and we come back in 6 months to a year, when I look at Orleans Parish compared to St. Charles Parish, the data is consistent and is giving us the same information and that we are talking the same talk. So I think that's the first step that has to happen prior to us just saying that this district is this and this school system is that. Also, when we looked at the court system, again, I know in Orleans we were not in alignment with our court system. Half the time they weren't in session, or they didn't have, the FENS program wasn't working. And so I think, again, we need to go back and look at each district and make sure in the state that the districts are talking the same, the court system is supporting, because if I'm reporting 10 to 15 days in a district and I have no backup, nothing's going to happen. And so I think those things have to be put in place so that we are very, very, very much on the same page with truancy.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen.
Dr. Ortling, if you would, please. In speaking to a friend, local district judge in my area, we talked about this issue, and he told me at the end of the day, I have an issue with, I want an example of teeth. What do you mean by putting teeth into it? Because he said at the end of the day, they know I can't go there and force them, you know, so give me an example of teeth.
So, and look, I'm not a judge, I don't claim to be, but I mean, there are truancy laws that can be enforced. And while I have heard from previous judges that you can't, when you have judges that are determined to do so, and whether it's sending official letters from the courts directly to these families, and they work in the district attorney's office in the FENS program, which is underneath the judge's supervision, they literally work directly with our attendance office, our child welfare and attendance office. So our reports that we are collecting from our schools, they provide that directly to the FENS office, and the FENS directly to the judges, and the judges said, no, this is what we're going to do from a diversionary standpoint, okay, without any punitive harm to the families, but basically strong-arming, saying that if you don't come to court, because right now you're in violation, I don't know what the statute is, or whatever it may be, you're in violation. This diversionary opportunity is to provide support to the families in lieu of whatever the actual statute violation that they're in violation of. Then when they come to the court, we provide wraparound supports through the school system as well as the community organizations to the families. Because obviously, if kids aren't going to school, then the parents aren't, right, accepting that as a priority for that household. So how can we support the families to make sure that changes? So part of our process is to provide support to the families. And so then those families start meeting with our nonprofit organizations with parenting and helping them understand the importance of making sure that their child attends school. Then as a school, we take those children and provide additional support at our schools. So it's really a wraparound support type system, but it's initiated first and foremost, especially if they're chronically absent or truant, by the court system. And it took 3 judges, 2 relatively new, to really say, you know what, we're done with this. We're not going to stand for it. We're going to do whatever we can. And in the last year and a half, we've seen a pretty significant change. And look, their funding, they'll tell you, they have not had increased funding to the FENS program in the state in a while, and that's their challenge. That was a challenge of, previous administration, that they didn't have the funding to put the teeth, right, to the program. But I have found that you get judges that are determined to make a difference, it can be done.
Just seems to me that going to school would be better than, they have to understand that going to school is better than staying home, and staying home would be a problem. As
If
was
you're in
my
school,
house.
you're less likely to get in trouble with the police. So not only you're learning, but you're not on the streets getting in trouble. But Mr. Castile?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Superintendent, thank you for your remarks. It's mind-blowing to me that we need so much judicial intervention to have parents send their kids to school, but that's sort of the reality that we find ourselves in. Got a few questions on the recommendations page. So I'll start perhaps with the one that addresses juvenile court judges. So create model program guidance. And Mr. Superintendent, I know you're leaving, but you might be able to speak on this a little bit, because you were talking about the teeth that's required for judges to get some results. And so that create model program guidance, have we started drafting the particular guidance that we want to share to the judiciary? And where is that flowing from? So I know, Ms. Holloway, we had a committee where we were working with the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, and judges around the state. I'm just wondering how that information is flowing through to the judiciary in terms of the guidance, and making sure that it's uniform guidance across the state, where we don't get, as the superintendent said, some pockets of success, because some judges are saying, here's what I can do and be successful, and others who are saying, as Mr. Birkin pointed out, that others are saying there's nothing that I can do. Can you elaborate a little bit more, please?
Sure. So on the STAR task force, we had 2 judges sit on the task force.
Okay.
And so in working with those 2 judges, and now we know that we can reach out to the judges in St. Charles, we will work with these individuals to create this guidance that can be implemented across the state. So of course, we can't force them to do so, but it's an option to say, oh, this is what is occurring in St. Charles Parish. This is what is occurring in Assumption Parish. This is what is occurring in Tangipahoa, in the tri-parish area with Tangipahoa, St. Helena, and I can't remember the other one, I think Washington. Or this is what is occurring in EBR, and they are seeing this kind of success with implementing these particular programs. And so maybe over in Grant Parish, we should implement this with our juvenile court judges so that we can better help our students to be in school and parents to understand the importance of being in school.
I would encourage, to the extent that it hasn't been done, surface it to the Supreme Court, that will set model rules and guidance on a number of different issues. But I think raising this at the top, which we have an extremely engaged Supreme Court that wants to do as much to help students that they even put together a task force, that would be helpful if it hadn't already been done.
And I will say that we do work with the FENS program, which is housed under the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And so we do have contact with them. I've sat on panels with various people from the Supreme Court, so we do have a contact. So we can definitely raise this issue with them.
Okay. If there's anything I can do to help in that regard, let me know. Can I go back up then to the top, though? The first recommendation requires schools to utilize an existing team to monitor and analyze attendance data. So this is monitoring, analyzing, but not a requirement that schools have to devote resources and funding to to force parents to send their kids to school. And the reason I ask that question is because schools find themselves trying to do that. Requires a lot more money, a lot more resources, difficult to do. The bigger the problem in terms of truancy or chronic absenteeism, the more the burden is on the school. So I really like that the shift is being placed to judiciary or some other entity to help get them to the school, because to the point of let teachers teach, you got to teach, but you also have to go and get the kids to come to school so that they'll teach. It's hard to do, and I know it's everybody's problem, but I'm just trying to understand where the lines begin and end in terms of what's being required of the school versus other agencies and entities.
So with the attendance team, we find that if we are looking at the data at the school level, and we know what is happening with the students, that they are better able to see and provide support to get the students in school. So if this existing team, the SBLC team, maybe we add the attendance clerk to that team, so they are looking at the data to determine, so, you know, these particular students who live over on these sets of streets, they're always late to school. Why are they always late to school? Why are they getting a tardy? Maybe it's the train running in that system, in that particular area, that causes those students to be late to school. So maybe we need to work with transportation to adjust the bus schedule, the bus route. Or maybe it's another issue going on in that particular community that needs to be adjusted. So that is what that team will do. We're not trying to add an additional team of people, but just to look at what is happening across the school with the data and why students are not in school.
So the information that you shared with us with regard to the pilot program with Baker High School, the numbers were off the charts, really, really high numbers. While it did come down some, you saw some success with the program. Can you highlight some of the things that you were seeing in terms of why the truancy, chronic absenteeism rate was up to where, and was it truancy or was it chronic absenteeism?
Both were really high.
Okay.
And with the work that they did by working at the school level and utilizing the data to determine what resources need to be put in place, they were able to encourage families to see the benefit of coming to school. They created parent-friendly materials. They updated a handbook to where they were all speaking the same language, kind of goes back to what Dr. Clark was saying, across the school, so that when they were entering attendance data, it was more accurate, more reflective of what was occurring in the school. And so that's one of the things that the attendance team at the local school will help to do, because what happens at Baker High School is going to be very different than what needs to happen at, say, Northeast High School, because it's a very different community. And so they really looked at the needs of the school to make the change in making coming to school important.
You mentioned earlier that there was a new hire that was made because over time there were budgetary cuts that really sort of gutted the department that handled this issue. And when I ask a question that's almost rhetorical, and that is, do you have enough resources, manpower, to truly make an impact in your work? Clearly, you're making progress, but what more is needed on your part? You got 4 former legislators that are sitting before you that have some influence with the legislature. So I'm asking this question for everybody's benefit.
So, we will continue to work with this particular work. We have 3 individuals right now. We actually have a vacant position that we will be posting soon to continue to work the work of attendance. So we have put money behind it over the years. We have added this to our super app process for 25-26. So we are putting some funds behind this, and I'm sure any additional funding would be great.
Thank you again. I appreciate your report and your comments. And thanks to Dr. Clark and Ms. Morris and those who elevated this issue to the state level such that we're spending as much time as we need on it.
Mr. Castillo, also, I think one of the important changes that we made when we made a shift in terms of recognition of schools on the disciplinary list, when we made that shift in our ESSA plan, we had funding available for those schools, and so we're doing a redistribution of that funding now to support schools around the attendance efforts. So whenever we bring allocations moving forward around additional funding for schools through an allocation through our super app process, just being supportive of that will be helpful. And the information that was shared around some of the districts that have a school that is experiencing some of the most significant complications with those numbers, those will be targeted for some of this support that we're going to offer. But this is a really complicated issue because, for one, and just frankly, this was something that this board and our team inherited in terms of just because of budget cuts over decades, there wasn't a lot of attention given to this particular area. And so you had 64 parishes across the state doing different things. And so as Dr. Ortling mentioned earlier, to solve for the attendance issue, number one, you have to honor the parents because that's really important that the parents are honored through this entire process. But at the same time, if you don't have a school system that has good data, and I'm not comfortable that we've had that across the entire state, we are moving to that. If you have good data, then you have to have, juvenile, you have to have district attorneys willing to participate and juvenile judges willing to participate, and social network and faith-based agencies willing to participate. And that looks different across the entire state of Louisiana, which contributes in many ways to the broken system that exists. And so that's why I think Dr. Clark's work on the STAR Task Force is really important because she's bringing to the table individuals from across the state from these different bodies of work so that we can at least get to, a base understanding of how do you come up with the data, what is the data, and then what do the data tell us, and then how can we respond to that? And so I think that the STAR Task Force being an inclusive body, continuing to move forward and pulling in additional individuals such as, the AG's office, some of the statewide nonprofits. I think all of those things will be helpful moving forward because this is really a complicated issue.
You mentioned something, Dr. Brumley, with regard to faith-based initiatives, and you travel in poor communities and affluent communities, and there are churches everywhere, which is a wonderful thing. I am curious to know about the level of collaboration and what more we could do to bring those stakeholders to the table, because clearly that's something that's being done. It was outlined in your report. And, because we're making this sort of progress now, I'd certainly encourage and whatever we can do to invite folks to the table that I know want to, but ensuring that folks know that this is happening on every street corner, that this is important, that everyone is responsible for every child in every household, and that they should be in a school. So if you all have additional ideas, because I'm glad you both elevated it, because we absolutely believe that those organizations in particular can play a vital role, and maybe additional outreach may be able to help. But I commend you on the work. This is excellent progress, and I look forward to even more.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Morris? President Morris?
Yeah, so Dr. Ortling, really appreciate your feedback. Had one question. When we think through the everyday work process at the schools, I visited some schools and they actually have an assistant principal or someone in a related capacity that's knocking on doors. Is that a standard practice at most schools, or was that an anomaly? Or can you help us out with how the day-to-day routine sort of works?
Sir. I could say that's probably not the standard, especially when you consider, the observation process and what our priorities are in the school during the school day, right? For those leaders, I mean, their priority is education, right? We expect them to be instructional leaders. The new rubric that we have, right, rolled out, that requires so much more additional time. I don't see how it's possible that an assistant principal that should be an instructional leader is doing those types of things. Not saying that it's not warranted and they can't fit it in, but I would say that's probably more the anomaly than the standard.
Okay, thank you. Going back to the team, again, to Mr. Castile's questions on the first recommendation, utilizing an existing team, certainly appreciate that concept, so we're not adding to team members. but I'm really interested when we talk about monitoring and analyzing attendance data. I'm assuming most schools have some sort of team that's addressing attendance already. So when we talk about analyzing the data, are we setting expectations for any particular data? So going back to Dr. Clark's comments about we need to be really clear about, what we're defining as true and what we're defining as chronic absenteeism. I don't know what other relative parameters should be considered, but as we look to school districts across the state for gathering this data, how can we best interpret this data to get positive outcomes? And then how can we share it across the state, right? So we can benefit from where we've learned. If we don't have standard protocols, standard data, then I don't understand how we're going to share it or analyze it across the state. So I'm really interested in your thoughts there with regard to expectations for these existing teams, what they're going to do differently from what they're doing today with regarding to standardizing the data so we have clear interpretation and so we can share our learnings.
So at this point, I can't say that many of the schools have an attendance team looking at the data. That is a possibility, but that is what we want to move forward with these particular systems that we want to invite to work with us on that. And so with the professional development that is being created, we will work with them on looking at the data at the school level. So how many absences are occurring in the school? How many of those absences are excused, unexcused? Do we see trends in the data with the unexcused absences? Is there a high prevalence of students who are unexcused absence due to X? And so why is that the case? Then that kind of brings in what Dr. Orling talks about, bringing in the family to determine what is happening so that we can make some changes within that particular school. And so we can look at that like on a regional basis and then probably elevate that to statewide. But again, it's going to look different from one school to the next because the needs of one school is going to be very, very different to the needs of another. And I'm sure that's something that Dr. Orling sees in his particular school system. It's really going to vary depending on, going back to what Member Castile said, the economic attributes of a particular school region. It's going to be very different.
And can I add this too? I think, though, what's important is even though the needs will be different from one school to the next, one district to the next, the data collected will be consistent from one school district to the next. And again, I look at Orleans Parish because our schools are listed as the majority of the schools for charters with absenteeism. But again, when the data collection is happening, even SBLC committees are re-engaged because they're supposed to be looking at attendance. These are existing entities already in our schools that's supposed to be helping us with this. But once you get to the point where a district is not in compliance with the statute and they're telling us to collect data and not report to 15 days, truancy is supposed to be reported at 5 days. So once a kid has been out of school for more than 5 days, the chances of getting that kid back re-engaged into your system is hard. So I think once we put these teams in place and we look at the data, that should have been caught immediately by LDOE within 6 days and saying, why isn't this district and this attendance team reporting and we don't see any action once this has been reported? So I think once those pieces are put in place across the state, our collection of data and publishing it, because then you're right, once we see that this same demographics, truancy is being dealt with in a different manner at this district, but it's the same demographics as this district, then we can kind of look at what resources and we can work together and making sure that whatever practices they're using, we can maybe help that district, the other district with the practices. Right now, because the data is so inconsistent, when I sat on the committee and I heard certain districts saying, well, we take 15 parent notes. We don't report that as truant because it's excused. Well, we take no parent notes. So my truancy is going to be higher than yours because I am reporting truancy where you're not. And so those consistencies have to happen for us to actually come up with a plan to me. Even before we re-engage the FINS programs, et cetera, the judges, our collection is really inconsistent across the state. So I agree with the publishing. It has to happen, but I think the data collection has to happen first.
I could add a thought too. Ashley Townsend with the department. One of the things that we noticed when talking with schools is that some did have teams in place that were looking at student level data. Some didn't. Some had ideas for how to mobilize an existing team and adapt it a little bit to consider attendance data. But there are some standardized best practices for looking at the data. What numbers should we look at? How do we look at those? That do need to be shared with schools. And so part of this training is going to address training for the individuals at the school district and the school level who deal with the data. How do I interpret these numbers? What do I look for? Who do I tell about this? What needs to happen next? And then part of that will be for the people at the school on that attendance team, whoever that includes, for what to do after that. Once this data point has been identified as an issue, how do we look at that and identify next steps or a school level plan? For example, one of the things, and usually to Dr. Orling's point, there are multiple issues that affect student attendance. And so in Baker, one of the things identified was that families didn't prioritize school attendance. So it made sense for them to develop communications to families about why school is important and why we should attend. That same measure might make sense everywhere, but it also might not. And so some of that training for the school level attendance teams will be how to best use the data to expend your existing resources on steps that make sense to address what the issue really is.
Thank you. Thank you. I see a lot of value in this one, this recommendation, so we can standardize the things for monitoring and share them across the state, and what can we learn across the state. My next question is on your slide 13, on your key endeavors. So when we talked about key endeavors in the past, my understanding is that these are the things that have to happen in order for us to achieve our goals, and they should be measurable. So I'm a little concerned about the 4 bullets here and how they're measurable. Can you help me out with that?
I would first dispute that every single key endeavor has to be measurable. Certainly, we would want the majority of them to be. But our agency takes on a lot of work every single day that isn't necessarily quantifiable. So I just want to be careful whenever we say every endeavor of the agency has to be measurable. Because even in the school system, if you look at the outcomes of the student in terms of, their reading performance or their math performance, and they're with a particular teacher for a year, you can't point to one particular thing that is the reason why a student scores X scale score on LEAP or math, but in many ways it's a combination of things. So I just want to be careful when we say every single endeavor must be measurable, but certainly the majority should be.
Yeah, so I just want to focus on key endeavors, certainly not all endeavors. So appreciate the superintendent's comment, but my concern is that how do we know what's working if we're not measuring it? And so if we're going to label something a key endeavor, then I would distinguish between a key endeavor and all endeavors. Certainly with no expectation we're going to measure all endeavors. But I do still have concerns, and we don't have to cover it exactly today, but I do have concerns with the 4 bullets here and how we're going to measure them. My next question is...
Can I chime in on that one, Mr. Morris?
Sure.
When I look at these, though, I would suggest that these probably are measurable, though. Conduct outreach on attendance. I imagine that you are gathering data and you're able to produce the outreach that occurs. Every time you have a meeting, every time you engage a stakeholder, that happens. Provide on-site training and support. You're documenting all of that. Provide on-site support visits to schools, that you're documenting all of that. Provide training and ongoing support. You have a record of all of that happening. And then I think the next question, if I'm following Mr. Morris's line of questions, is from that, at a broader level, Dr. Brumley, what sort of results? So it's not the micro sort of management, but that's happening. And when those 4 things happen and you're tracking it because you know you're doing it at a certain frequency and pace, and then we're achieving different results, hopefully better results, then that does become a performance indicator that we can track and correlate. Am I tracking with you, Mr.
Yeah,
Morris?
I think that's accurate too, in the way in which even one of the slides that we has references participation on calls. We can certainly track systems participating in those particular calls. So, yeah, I just want to be clear that these most important key endeavors, as Mr. Morris mentioned, yeah, certainly we can track, but I just want to be careful that every endeavor for which we're engaged isn't necessarily quantifiable.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, no exception taken on that for sure. But I just feel like that we've identified specific efforts that we know need to be accomplished in order for us to be successful, or students to be successful, then they should be measurable, so we have some indication of whether or not they're working or not. My next question is on slide 13. Again, well, maybe it's actually slide 14. The reference to the MTSS. So it sounds really impressive, engaging with the folks at LSU on multi-tiered systems of support. I'm interested in how we're going to follow up on that as far as implementation.
Before Dr. Singleton answers that, I also want to speak here just philosophically that, I don't want our agency to attempt to take the place of a parent or to attempt to take the place of a nurse or a doctor or a mental health counselor or anyone such as that. We are the Department of Education. We're pursuing academic excellence as much as possible. So we can certainly help support and facilitate processes and local connections. And it's not in response to your question. It's just something else I want to throw out there because I've been having this conversation with members of our legislature a good bit, that educators aren't mental health professionals. Educators aren't, the school isn't the hospital. Teachers aren't the parent. And so I just want to make sure with all of these conversations that we're having that we're not trying to usurp the professionals in those particular space. And Dr. Singleton, please respond directly to the question, but I just wanted to, you prompted my thought around that particular piece, and I think it's important.
Yeah, so that falls in line with working with that particular attendance team and creating those tiered leveled interventions that needs to be in place at that particular school.
So that's going to be a standard across the state?
I'm sorry, say
Is
again?
that going to be a standard across the state?
It won't be a standard because what happens at school A is going to be different than what
But
happens
the
at school
tiers,
H.
in general terms, the tiers are still generic enough that would apply everywhere, I would think.
Well, the actions within the tiers are generic, but what has to happen at Baker High School is going to be different in
Right.
Tier 2 that needs to happen at Northeast High School or at Central High School in Tier 2.
Right.
They need to have customized interventions at that particular
Right.
tier for that school.
Right.
So yeah, the tier, what happens in the tiers are pretty much generic across the top, across the entire MTSS, but actually what happens at one school is going to be different than what happens at another school.
Right, no, I get that. I'm just interested in looking forward to future conversations when we can talk about implementation of MTSS. Is that fair?
Yes.
Imagine a standardized process for development, but not necessarily a standardized outcome.
Right, exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Ms. Townsend. Next question is the next slide, 15. When we look at the history for chronic absenteeism in our goals going forward, if we look from 21 to 23 and we look from 24 to 28, then it looks like our goals are aligned with the rate of escalation. So we increased 5% from 21 to 24, and we're looking at decreasing 5% from 25 to 28. So I'm curious about what our ultimate goal is. Right now, we're saying that basically 25% of the kids in the state miss 10% or more of the school time. 25% of the kids in the state miss 10% or more of school time. And our goal is to get it to 18%. What's reasonable, longer term? Well, what percent of kids, I know we're not physicians here, but some folks in this room have more history than I do in this space. I'm just curious, what is a reasonable expectation for the percent of students that miss 10% or more of school? I mean, is 18% realistic long term? Is that where our expectations should be? Do we have any idea?
So we selected this particular data point as one that we have been at in the past. And so realistically, we hope that we can get to that 18%. But, you know, in practical terms, when we look at what occurred, like in Baker at that one school, that the chronic absenteeism rate went down at that school. The overall chronic absenteeism rate for the city of Baker schools did not change much. So it is going to be a yeoman's job to get this done, but as we start at the school level, hopefully we will see some incremental change over time.
Okay, so apparently we don't really have a good feel for, you know, longer term where we'd like to be, but we think there's a realistic goal for the next 3 years.
Yes.
Okay. Just a couple more. When I look at slide 19 and the list of districts in the lowest attendance quartile, you know, one of the districts is in my Bessie district, and that's East Baton Rouge Parish. And when I look at the numbers there for truancy, the last 4 years, the average truancy rate is 55%. And we look at the crime rate in that district, and there's definitely a correlation there. So I'm really interested to hear follow-up on that one from Mr. Castillo's references to the judicial system, and I'm also interested in how we can work with our legislators to consider ways to address that critical situation, which, to superintendent's comment, is above and beyond the academic concerns. They affect every society and every community in our state. And then just two more. The references to the super app and potential funding going forward to address this. One of the things that we shared in the task force from the J Campus folks is that the technology is available now where for $200 they have a device where kids can badge in and out, and particularly in our high schools with single point of entry to address Dr. Clark's concerns about accuracy and other reports we received, the task force about accuracy. Seems like this would be a good use of current technology to help to address that, as well as efficiency in the process, and maybe to make some additional resources available because the computers are doing the work. But I just want to raise that for everyone's attention. For $200, apparently you can put in a badging system in a high school. The kids already have the badges with the barcodes, so it's very easy to implement. And then the last one I had was, I think I heard that the next update wasn't going to be until December of '25. Is that right?
Yes, sir. We have our standardized KPI presentation schedule, and so attendance month is December for KPI presentations. We have all the other Bessie meeting months planned out with different topics.
So I'm just wondering, given the critical nature of this item and the fact that we have the districts are required to report this data real time now, I was wondering if we could get an update prior to that with how implementation of some of these recommendations is working.
I will say a few of these recommendations are policy related, so over the next few months, maybe summer, whenever we bring that policy recommendation to the board, I mean, of course, before we do that, we want to take some time to engage with stakeholders on that policy, our school district partners, et cetera. And so I would imagine at the time that we bring that policy to the board, we could have an update on some data as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to Dr. Clark again for leading this
Chair.
effort.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo?
And I don't want to belabor it. Mr. Morris asked my comments as it relates to EBR, which is clearly within my Bessie district. And I would suggest a few things. You're right that there is some correlation between truancy, chronic absenteeism, poverty, crime, and a number of other factors. Right now, I know that Bessie, we're doing what I think is a wonderful thing, and that is we're touring the state regarding some of the new policies that we've implemented, particularly around accountability, the new high school performance metrics, because we want to improve the quality of our workforce. But I would suggest that as we have those discussions, we do have a bully pulpit, and we are meeting with stakeholders around the state, that we add this item to that agenda, that we have that discussion with business, with industry, with anyone who will listen to us. And so Mr. Walker, I would say, is our executive director, that as we're scheduling this and going around the state, that because this has been elevated, to everyone's credit who's been doing so, that we do raise it, and every opportunity we have an opportunity to engage business, industry, DAs, the criminal justice system, juvenile justice system, that we do that. And as people recognize that there is that correlation, because when that kid is not in the school and they're at home, more likely than not, there are going to be other problems that develop. And so the more we can keep sounding the alarm and engaging our community, and while we're doing it, again, you're going across the state, that we add this as an item of discussion and pick up as many stakeholders as we possibly can to collaborate with them.
Can I add one more piece into that too? I think too, and I'm very protective of the school systems, because at the end of the day, sometimes what I hear is the schools or the districts aren't doing enough, and that is not true. I think the schools and the districts are doing quite a lot. And just so that everybody knows, when Tommy does not appear at my school and doesn't come to school, I get a 0 for that kid on my accountability. So at no time do I not want Tommy to come to school, or I'm not going into the neighborhood if I have the resources to do it, because I can't drop that kid once that kid is on my roster. I receive a 0. And that hurts my performance at my school and my teachers who are working hard. But going back to let teachers teach, it is hard to ask teachers, even social workers, because we have issues that are happening within our schools, to go knock on the door in a neighborhood. Some of them don't even want to drive through. And I want to be very honest about that, because I think that we don't always have honest conversation, and the narrative is put out that the schools aren't doing the work. So once I do the data collection, once I go through the resources, allocate, work with the family, we do need support from the judicial system. And there are things in the statute such as fines, community service. Parents can even be in prison for their kids not coming to school. We can't do those things. But it does affect our performance. It affects us academically. And it's not a great feeling in your school when you see kids at home. I think when I looked at the results from Baker and I looked at the different surveys and why the kids didn't want to go to school, because it was the high school that you guys worked with, it was basically they didn't see the relevance of going to school to the real world that they lived in. And so that is something that I think we do need to look at, because my age and why we went to school, whether we wanted to go or not, is different from the kids of today. If they don't see relevance, they don't want to do it. And so how do we make sure our system is feeding into their needs? But I am going to be very protective of districts and teachers and superintendents, and the fact that nobody wants a 0 because they can't get the kid in their building. I'm done.
Sure. Mr. Hollis?
Very much so. On the STAR Task Force, we had several different school systems represented, and that is one of the topics that came up. Whereas in one school system, they would not accept a parent note for illness, whereas in another school system, they did. So the idea of standardizing that was one of the recommendations that came directly out of individuals who are in the schools and working with the attendance issue. Yeah. No, that's not something that came up, but that's something that we can definitely discuss. Is, yes. Yeah, so one of the recommendations, number 2, is to talk about basically creating a discretionary referral process for truancy, kind of like exactly what you stated, because you're correct. The definition of truancy in Louisiana is very stringent as compared to the other states, especially even in the SREB region. So it's very different. So I agree.
President Morris.
Yeah, I just wanted one more time just to acknowledge Dr. Clark's leadership on this effort. Really appreciate her chairing the task force, and I'm hoping that she's going to stick with it and lead us again this next year so that we can celebrate some of our outcomes. So thank you, Dr. Clark.
Ms. Holloway?
I don't have any follow-up comment on Mr. Hollis's remarks.
Ms. Holloway?
Yes, I have something to add, and actually a recommendation. Mr. Castillo, thank you for making the comment about judges in the schools. And the recommendation I have is from Supreme Court Justice Weimer. I sent him a message about your remarks just moments ago. And for all of you who are here, we started judges in the schools or in the classrooms when I was president. And then Preston was the one appointed as a Bessie member to participate in this program, which has been really good for our students. But I made the comment to him, I texted him, and I said, there's this comment from Preston indicating, asking if judges were involved. And of course, you said yes. And I said that there is a great concern about absenteeism across the state. So I shared it a little bit with him. But this is his response. So, Mr. Morris, I'm not quite sure who would respond to this, Ms. Clark. He says, we often do mention the importance of education and the importance of showing up as the first step. Please have someone send to me a letter asking the judges to focus on concerns about absenteeisms and any other concerns while mentioning our partnership and collaboration, and I can forward that to all judges statewide. So, thank you, Mr. Castillo, appreciate that.
Yeah, and
Your
let me follow
engagement.
up, in terms of insight of the committee, Chief Justice Weimer deserves a lot of credit, and that's
Absolutely.
consistent with his leadership of the court and this particular task force, because to hear Supreme Court justices, Court of Appeal judges, and district court judges on down looking for ways to get into classrooms and help. They are literally going around the state, and I almost feel bad because it's almost as if it's an afterthought that they're available as a resource, and they're trying so hard to give back, and they're looking for ways to do so. So I think there's an incredible intersection. And the power of the chief is really, really powerful. One, he's a charismatic, influential guy, and the fact that he responded back to Ms. Holloway as quickly as he did, I think is a testament to the fact that they really, really want to engage on helping in education, and the fact that we've identified this as a specific issue where they have some teeth and authority to do something about creates an opportunity for us. And because they are elected officials themselves, they also have a constituency that, that will support their efforts beyond their powers as judges. So I think it's a powerful tool. Ms. Holloway, thank you for connecting with the chief so quickly and getting that feedback. I just
Well,
think
you know,
it's
he is from
incredible.
Thibodeau. So that kind of answers.
He was also my teammate on the basketball team.
And
He
he
said he
does
was
play
much better.
basketball with my boys,
Yeah,
so
he
you're
used to
one
play
of
with
them.
me
Yeah.
on the Senate team.
That's right.
And he
Okay.
also graduated from Harvard on the Bayou.
He did. But his last words are, we look forward to working with you and the board. He really does. So, Mr. Morris,
Yeah, so
Sharon.
Ms. Holloway, just echo Mr. Castillo's remarks. We certainly appreciate the prompt response, appreciate your local connection there, and also as well as the connection with other members on the board. But we certainly will respond with a letter, no doubt.
And a basketball team.
And we'll work on the basketball team. But also, I think, if we could possibly even extend an invitation to the judge, and have him come speak to us and just extend that level of engagement. So appreciate the conversation on this particular topic. I know it's a foundation for everything we do. So appreciate everyone's engagement and looking forward to the continued conversation on this with positive outcomes.
Hey, Sandy, ask him if he can come next month. I bet he would come if he's available.
I will do that shortly. Thank you.
We have two folks from the audience who'd like to speak on this, Alexa Hookfin and Holly Bofi. Well, y'all want to come down? And while you're doing that, Ms. Holloway, did you have a little introduction? You lost it.
I got it. Yes, I'd like to make an introduction, actually a very personal, because we have educators here from district offices across the state that are passionate about education and desire to move up into a superintendency position at some point. So today we have the LSBA and last Level Up League Future Superintendent Cohort. Would you please stand so we can see who you are? Thank you for representing us. Thank you. And appreciate it. And one more. Sorry about that, Dr. Bofi. Dr. Holly Bofi was a former Bessie member for 3 terms, I believe. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Dr. Brumley?
Mr. Appel, I think it's really important to capture student perspective, and we've been talking about truancy as adults for some time, and we happen to have Mr. Blake Grabert as a member of this body right now as our student representative. So I would think it would be appropriate, Blake, for you to just kind of give your impression on what we could do to encourage more students to be at school faithfully each and every day.
Yeah, so oftentimes I think back to what was said earlier in regards to standards with education, that I think a lot of times when there's not a practical application, there's just the idea that it's not necessarily the most important thing for me to be doing right now. And obviously there's a lot of times where it's just so much easier to just miss the bus, there's a problem with this, like there's always an easier way to look out. So whenever there's not necessarily an aspect of how is this helping me with the future, it's the idea that we don't necessarily need to do it right now. I mean, I know oftentimes like submitting work and things like that, like it's always easier to not, obviously, but especially when it comes to like no real application moving forward, they're a lot less likely to want to do it. So for cases where maybe less driven individuals, maybe on like Jumpstart pathway and things like that, are just, faced with 3 classes a day their senior year, and it's only like a business English and this and that, they're just of the idea that it's not for me because, it's not something that's really helping me moving forward. So I think a greater emphasis and practical application is, I think, a good way to phrase it, was implemented, then it would be a lot more successful moving forward with attendance.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Hookman.
Good morning. I am from Tangipahoa Parish, and I am delving into attendance via Everyday Labs. And the actionable data that Dr. Singleton was speaking of, Everyday Labs makes it easily accessible. It's really, really an interactive dashboard that gives you actionable data at a glance. It's tiered. It's tiered from satisfactory to severe. Everything is color-coded, so green is satisfactory. Tier 1, less than 5% absenteeism. Yellow is at risk. Orange is moderate. Red is severe. Chronic red is extreme. When you hover over as a school principal any of the students in those colors, it would identify those students individually. For your students that need tiered intervention, Everyday Labs also provides suggestions for those interventions. Also, they provide barrier assessments. The information is tied into J-Campus. We also use a lot of the Attendance Alliance components with the Everyday Labs component, and they allowed us to use their friendly verbiage to send out to our parents, which is a plus. Our parents like all of the nudges. Even though we're encouraging them to send their students to school, they like how we're saying, we need your help, or we missed you today, or how can we help you? So the interventions are provided for you, the tiers are provided for you, summary data, the parents get to talk directly with Everyday Labs to let them know what some of their barriers are. We have had parents reach out to them for transportation barriers, food barriers, personal barriers. We actually this summer had a student have an emergency and did a 911 type of ordeal through Everyday Labs. So we really like the program. It gives you actionable data at a glance. You can identify the trends monthly, daily, yearly. We just did our 3-month trend. We have improved slightly, and it shows us exactly where we need to do our work.
Mr. Morris?
I'm sorry, I missed your identification. What's your relationship to Everyday Labs?
We're one of the districts that are piloting Everyday Labs in Tangipahoa Parish.
Okay.
She's Tangipahoa School.
Okay, great. So, yeah, so this was one of the questions I had on my list and I missed it, so appreciate your testimony today.
Yes, sir.
I know there were a number of districts that we partnered with implementation of Everyday Labs, and so I'm just, I'm really interested in the outcomes from the different districts, where some districts had, let's say, more positive outcomes than others with implementation of the tool. But what I'm hearing from you is that it worked really well for Tangi, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and what are your expectations for future implementation?
Well, one of the reasons we used a lot of the components from the Louisiana Attendance Alliance were in case we did not have Everyday Labs. However, we're hoping to keep Everyday Labs because they do a lot of the heavy lifting. They actually inform the parents of the nudges and the information that we would normally have to sit down and send out. Also, it allows us to find out who does not, they opt out for our nudges or communications. We get information like emails are better than cell phones, or these numbers aren't good. So we are finding that more and more parents are buying into it because it's not punitive. The verbiage is positive. When you come to school for your attendance plan, it isn't, we told you so. We pretty much have a script that we go by, and we're respectful of their time. We're respectful of the instructional time. And so we're excited with our data, and it's really not intimidating to school leaders when you use this type of data.
So your parent engagement has been positive?
We are getting more parent engagement. However, it's been an effort from all areas. Our leadership teams through via curriculum actually focuses on attendance in our district. However, we're dealing with the nurses. It's a collaborative effort right now for us to get the best bang for our buck.
Right. Superintendent Brumley spoke to that real well earlier. All this ownership doesn't belong with our teachers. It's going to take a village, right?
Correct. And it does a lot of the heavy lifting for the teachers.
Yeah. So my last question, with use of this tool, has it relieved some of the load on your staff?
It has definitely released some of the load on the truancy designee. The only problem is it doesn't roll out for every truant student or every student that's chronically absent, because with the pilot, it only gave us a percentage of students. So we have to keep up and make sure that it coincides with J Campus.
Okay. So there's room for improvement, but it has provided some relief to your staff.
Yes,
Great. Thanks so much for sharing.
yes, thank you.
Anybody else? Just one quick question. What about cost structure? How much does it cost? Or is it prohibitive cost to do the whole system?
Well, actually, Everyday Labs has reached out to my superintendent, but right now the pilot is a gift from the state. So, but Superintendent Stilley is anticipated on discussing matters with them. But of course, also J Campus, because of the CIS, we also have a great relationship with them as well. This is just easily accessible and non-intimidating in the color code.
No, I understand. I just didn't know if it was a very expensive operation to undertake, but that's okay. That's subject for the study group to work on. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Ms. Holloway. I appreciate being here for this conversation again, Mr. Morris. One of the things, though, that I wanted to share with you all is I have the privilege of, I'm Holly Bofi. I have the privilege of being on a truancy team at my school, and I think there's a couple of points that have already come up that I just want to highlight. One is around affordable housing for our students and how when our students are moving place to place, attendance becomes less of a concern for families when they are being evicted from a household. So there's these social issues like affordable housing that play into this and is part of the factor. That also, I know that we're looking at previous attendance data. I would be interested to see what we have and how that compares to mental health data at the same time that attendance data was true, because I know that you guys are seeing it more often, I'm seeing it more often, and we've seen the legislature, right, like take the law about no cell phones during instructional time in place because of the issues with mental health, but it's just become that much more of an issue, right, for all families that struggle with mental health, and so that makes it more complicated as well. And I want to build off of comments that I heard here and also the other speaker relative to tiering and a strategic use of resources, right? Like we can't just focus on attendance because we want kids to learn. And if all of our focus is on getting kids to school and we take the focus away, the teaching and learning in the classroom, that could be a problem, right? So it's this like really tight needle that we're trying to thread around the strategic use of resources. And I want to build, and I think there's an opportunity to look at it a little differently around not this either or, right? Because it's either kids are truant or they're not. But what we have happening is we have kids who had been truant, we've been able to intervene, and they're trending in a different way. And our data does not show that, right? I mean, that's one of the challenges that we have is that we don't have strong enough data to even make good comparisons against the schools. I appreciate what you're talking about. Some of the districts may be on that list because they don't allow a parent note. And if only they would have allowed the parent note, they wouldn't have ended up in the lowest quartile there. So I think the complexities there are very important to highlight. And I would just encourage the study group to think about not just whether or not kids are truant, but which way are kids trending? And that's the conversation we have on our truancy team, because I look at the kids every week, I look at their numbers, but my question is always, are we trending in a positive direction? Have we done the recovery? Because that's something my own school system is offering, is attendance recovery for students. Have we done the recovery, and are we moving in the right direction? And so I feel like we are getting more elaborate data systems, and we have opportunities to really go about this in a way to offer a strategic use of resources.
Mr. Chairman,
Who's that?
quick question.
Okay.
Dr. Boakley, can you explain attendance recovery, please?
Yes. So in Lafayette Parish, students who have missed a certain amount of days so that they are not in danger of failing for the year, because part of our pupil progression plan, and I'm sure you could look at pupil progression plans from across the state, but part of our pupil progression plan is that for students who miss too many days, they're at risk of failing for that school year. We know that sometimes students are able to come back, make up the difference, learn the material, and we don't want to hold a child back. We give them options for some attendance recovery.
Is that implemented broadly around the state, Dr. Brumley?
Individual systems will oftentimes operate in attendance recovery programs, say on Saturday or after school or different times. So yeah, I mean that is organized locally by various school systems based on their personnel and ability to do so.
Do you have a sense of how many on a percentage basis around the state are doing?
I would think it would be fairly widespread. I mean, I'm not familiar with a system that isn't necessarily trying to perform some attendance recovery efforts.
Thank you.
And the point I'm just trying to make is that if we put, let's say it's 25% of the kids, if we put 25% of the kids in a group and saying that they're truant, then I can't tell the difference in those 25%, whereas some of them may have experienced some home instability or a death or something like that. We've got them back in school, they're on the right track, then that's a child that I'm putting off to the side that doesn't need as much attention. Where as opposed to, there's a kid missing school, I don't know where this child is, I need to get to them. And I think you've heard before, there's just limited resources and limited time. And anything we can do to build into the policy to help people understand the data, some of us will be able to go and buy sophisticated systems that color code it for us. Other districts will not. That's the reality of Louisiana. And so however we can tier policies and just be responsive to how complex this issue can be, while at the same time realizing the point of school is for kids to learn. And frankly, I'm of the belief that if the learning is the more important thing. So I just offer that because I do have the privilege of sitting on a truancy team, and so wanted to share that. I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, do we have any objection to the motion that we heard an hour ago? No objection. Next item.
Your next item is on page 148, item 5.1, consideration of revisions to bulletins regarding early childhood policy alignment and standardization. The recommendation is to approve as notices of intent revisions to bulletins 137 and 139.
I'm sorry, I had the thing off. We have one card in support of the motion, Cindy Bishop from the Child Care Association of Louisiana. She does not wish to speak. Is there any comments or questions? Hearing none, any objection to the motion? The motion stands adopted.
Your next item is on page 162, item 6.1, consideration of the summary of public comments and agency response concerning public comments received in reference to the October 20th, 2024 Notice of Intent regarding Bulletin 103, Louisiana Health Education Content Standards. The recommendation is to receive the SPCAR, authorize Bessie staff to submit the summary report to the legislative oversight committees, and direct Bessie to proceed with final adoption of the Notice of Intent regarding Bulletin 103 with the submission of the final rule in January 2025 edition of the Louisiana Register.
Mr. Harris moves, and Mr. Castile seconds. Do we have any comments, anybody? Okay, is there any objection to the motion? The motion stands adopted.
That concludes your agenda.
Thank you, and Thank you all for putting up with, obviously, Bessie is very concerned about the truancy issue, and I appreciate the deep and meaningful conversation we had today. Thank you all for being here.
We will begin the next committee meeting in 5 minutes.